Hi there. Dear participants of the Bitkom Privacy Conference 2021. Today it is day one after the German Bundestag elections. And of course, we are all very curious to know how the political parties will form a coalition. And we are even more curious to know what topics in digital policy and especially data policy are about to come. Well, tonight in this panel, we come a little bit down to earth to the practice of the GDPR. And we want to look at the status quo, and we want to look at recent developments in that field. We want to know what questions are crucial and so important and worthy to be highlighted here at our panel. Because today is not only day one after our elections here in Germany, but it is also day 1221 since the GDPR became applicable law in the whole European Union. That is quite a while, of course, and that is why we want to know how the implementation of the GDPR had been managed in practice. And the focus on that panel should lay on the data economy, hopefully a successful one, of course. And so it's only consequent to talk with two of the major players in digital economy. Let's welcome Cecilia Alvarez. Since 2 years, she's Facebook's privacy policy director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. For more than 2 decades, Cecilia specializes in data protection law in various constellations, and she also chaired the Spanish Privacy Professionals Association. Hello, Cecilia.
Sorry, let me unmute. Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very honored to be with you in this so important day for Germany in particular and for Europe as well.
We're glad to have you here. And with us is Cornelia Kutterer, Senior Director at Microsoft and within European Government Affairs, in charge for no less than the rule of law and responsible tech. Her team covers such important issues such as ethical AI. Hello, Cornelia.
Hello, I'm really pleased to be here. Unfortunately not in person in Berlin. That would have been really fun after the election, but it's going to be fun just being online with you as well.
Indeed, indeed. And then there is Axel Voss in our round, member of the European Parliament, because it may be possible to talk about the GDPR without a person who'd been involved in creating that law. But of course, it's much better to include someone who was right in the center of European lawmaking back in 2016. Hello to Bonn or Brussels, I don't know, Axel Voss.
So it's Düsseldorf today.
It's Düsseldorf today.
Because years after the election, we have our board meeting here, then for the so for the regional board. So thanks for the invitation. Thanks for this good idea to put these together. And thanks also for having me.
Thank you for being with us. I am Frederick Richter, your moderator in this panel, and I also deal with data-related topics a lot since I am with Stiftung Datenschutz, the German Federal Foundation for Data Protection. Now, this is a clean all-lawyer panel. We four are all lawyers by profession, so please be a little forgiving if there might occur some technical inaccuracies at some point. So, dear digital audience, let us start with some introductory notes or remarks by our panelists. Perhaps, Axel, would you start?
Yes, of course. Thanks a lot. So I see Europe in a kind of a disadvantage already regarding the digital competition or the digital race, and for two reasons. At first, we are seeing digitalization is more made for central systems. So as much data as you can store centrally, you can also use AI now for the information analysis, etc. And this is better for the future and for the consequences out of it. Secondly, if we are then only focusing on data protection, but don't get me wrong, I'm in favor of data protection, but I still think we have to balance these in a better way and not to overrate privacy protection, data protection in a way that we won't have innovation and so on. And therefore, I would say the GDPR is a keystone in our fundament of digital legislation, but we have to be open also for modernizing it year by year or whatever it is. So what I'm seeing is that we have a lot of, I would say, shortcomings detected already. And here we can see if this is new technology, what is not really in line with the GDPR any longer. If we are looking to blockchain, you can't delete your personal data any longer. So if we are coming to AI, you need a lot and also personal data to train your algorithms. And that's why the GDPR is not made for this. Even if we are looking to home offices, I would say, it's not very easy that all of your employees are a kind of an expert in data protection any longer. So that's why I think we need to modernize for competition reasons and also for adapting new technologies in a way. So, and we have a kind of one size fits all approach. And this is something for smaller, let's say, craftsmen or whatever. You don't need this all what you need for Facebook or what you need for Microsoft. The risk of kind of a data breach at that level is not that high like the big ones are when they are dealing with the data. So that's why I'm asking always for modernizing the GDPR already, because the development is very fast. And this is why I would say we can have some updates here. Of course, as you know, I put all these shortcomings together in one paper. And of course, there are different levels in solving these. So at first, you can have better guidelines. Second, you can have clear clarification in the text. Third, probably, and this is something what you need probably at the end to discuss some principles. But I know now discussing principles is probably not the best way forward. But to have a kind of a better approach on GDPR and balancing on and preparing ourselves better for the future and have access to data and using data also probably for second purpose, or if you have mixed data sets, this all should be more clearer, and that's why I'm asking for modernizing the GDPR.
Thank you. Well, Cecilia, would you step in with some general thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much. I am actually very much aligned with, I was taking notes of everything that Axel was saying, and in particular, because he's at the origin of part of the framework that we have here. Definitely, he's a very authorized voice in this connection. I truly believe that the implementation of GDPR, but starting with the directive, because this is not suddenly something that happens out from the blue 3 years ago. But it is complex. It is definitely onerous. I think the element of the cost has also been mentioned before, but definitely a data protection framework is still necessary. However, probably we should be thinking of having something that is more affordable, something that is more intuitive, because it seems that it's only affordable to the true experts, right? And it says that there is a lot of distance between what we think should be the response of this framework and what it is really the response of the framework. And this is not something easy, I think, for organizations of all sizes and sectors to be able to deal with this. And I think we should be able to also have a regulation that is not translated only as a cost, but as an investment, in addition to be an ethical imperative, if I may use this expression. So not necessarily this data protection framework should be a GDPR, but definitely this is a framework that enables us to learn from what we have in this long history, starting with the directive and then the GDPR. And One thing that I would like to mention, now that Mr. Voss mentioned that maybe data protection is overrated, and in the context that he mentioned, of course, that is not important. It is very important, but it needs to be balanced against other fundamental rights and freedoms in context. I think that not all the problems that we have in life are data protection problems, but sometimes it seems to. And probably because we do not have a GDPR for the freedom of expression. We do not have a GDPR for the fundamental rights and freedoms. So sometimes when we want to find a solution, it seems that we go to the law that exists because there is nothing else, or that we forget that there are other principles that we have in the Constitution, other principles that exist in other pieces of the law that actually are providing responses already. But maybe we are not necessarily looking at something in a more holistic manner. I would like to, and this will be the last part of this introductory remark, with respect to AI, because this has also been mentioned, and I think it's inevitable, right? That we think about a data-driven economy and the role that artificial intelligence is already playing, and that we would like, as Europeans, also to have a more decisive role with respect to how AI is used in our, not only our economy, but our society, because at the end of the day, this is something that has an impact in our lives, in addition to our jobs, which has both extremely important. So with respect to AI, I think that they are behind all the things that we have had now as part of our quality of life. I think we use this for finding directions on a map, to have a chatbot with an online store, to get in books or film recommendations, to have even best translations on the spot with respect to many items. In Facebook, I think maybe some of you could be users of some of the services, but this is at the core of the personalization of the service that is offered with respect to the contents, with respect to AI, as it happens with any personalized thing. And now everything seems to be personalized. The personalized banking, the personalized medicine, and it seems that there is something that we really try to center on the individual, which I think is not necessarily a bad idea, but it has a certain number also of concerns that are associated with. But I would like to mention one thing that I think probably is less evident, that is content moderation. And this is Facebook probably uses very much, but many other companies as well. Probably many persons think about the AI in the algorithm that enables to serve the ads or other kind of contents, but they do not think about the role that AI helps to be able to review contents in order to avoid hate speech, in order to avoid harassment, in order to avoid sexual exploitation, in order to avoid so many horrible behaviors that are also because we are not that different online than offline. And these kind of things happen as well. And AI is used differently and is used not alone, but with human reviews and with fact checkers, but it has a very important role that is, I would say, behind the scenes. So if I may finish with final remarks, with respect to the AI regulation that is also coming, and for me is a kind of data protection regulation as well. If we go beyond also the personal data element, we should definitely leverage the good things of GDPR, maybe rethink certain things that I think we have already identified that are not working as well. And think also that we need to address the personal data transfers, because one thing is to address the infrastructure, another thing is to address the data that are behind. And international transfers as part of this economy that is data-driven. We cannot be building a house if the foundations are in sand. And this is my last remark, and with this, I leave you the floor, I think, to Cornelia.
Indeed, Cornelia, please take the floor.
Thank you so much. And there's already so much said that would probably fill hours to discuss in more detail.
We have only half of those left.
Well, let me go back to the 1,221 days of GDPR, if I understood you correctly. I've not counted it in days so far. I've only counted it in years.
I used an app for this.
Wonderful. Yeah. So let me go back to the first year, 2 years before it entered into force, the 2 years of implementation phase. We at Microsoft in the first year really focused in building the infrastructure for the services where we are the controller of the data. So mainly the B2C services, and have sort of built the infrastructure and the compliance infrastructure to build out our structure. From this learning in being a controller, we have then built out how we can help our customers in the B2B field, where we are the processor and our customers are the controllers, to help them to comply with GDPR. So it has built out a real muscle internally. Generally, though, I would say that the GDPR has really inspired a global movement of data protection around the world. And just in the United States alone, I think in the last 6 months, there were more than 30 bills on privacy. And we have seen this in Southern America, in Asia. So the GDPR has been quite impactful on the global stage. But this said, of course, I'll start with the last point Cecilia raised with the data transfers. And of course, I sneaked in a little bit and listened to Alex Greenstein, who was just interviewed before our panel on privacy, the enhanced privacy shield. It is remarkable that we have, despite the GDPR, such a legal uncertainty around data transfers. And despite the legal uncertainty that was created through the Schrems II decision, I think a lot of companies have been able to respond to the legal uncertainty and provide additional assurances to their customers. We did this immediately after the Schrems II decision, for example, by moving all our services directly to the standard contractual clauses. And today, by the way, is also the first day, the end of the timeline to adopt the new standard contractual clauses, maybe also worthwhile to mention. And then we saw the first frequently asked questions from the European Data Protection Board and responded with our enhanced privacy commitments. We have further thought about this. So companies have really evolved in how they provide insurances to the customers. But of course, that comes with an enormous amount of effort in this space. Our latest announcement, and that is really interesting, is the EU data boundary announcement, where we said, okay, a lot of customers really asked for local storage of data within the European boundaries. And so we are addressing this, although I will say that the data flow remains critical for the data economy in the future. So responding to customers, in particular in the public sector, does not necessarily mean that data flows are not absolutely essential to the data economy. And hence the efforts that both the European Commission do and the United States to enhancing in getting to a new enhanced privacy shield are fundamental to the economy to function. But this said, it's interesting, of course, to look at GDPR and sort of where are the potential areas for improvement. First of all, you can see already now that there is a lot of litigation and jurisprudence evolving over key questions. And some of them are still not solved. To mention, for example, that the scope of the data transfers is very different than the scope or the jurisdiction of Article 3. So there is a lot of questions that remain in this context to be solved. Another area that I think have led to potentially also more cost on the economy are the unclarity around derogations in GDPR, which are not necessarily supportive of an internal market. But I will also mention something that aligns eventually or puts another aspect to what Cecilia was mentioned in the context of content moderation or in the context of AI. There's certain value tensions that we are seeing evolving between critical questions of data protection and other areas such as digital safety or national security. And these issues have been evolving over the last couple of months and maybe years into really clashes of these values. You can talk about end-to-end encryption or the recent discussions we had in Brussels around sexual child abuse image material are just proving the point that there are these value tensions and we need to find better solutions to that. When it comes to eventually easing, and this will be my last word, even so there's a long list of what could still be discussed, is the interesting developments that we are now seeing in the UK that now no longer within the European Union take the opportunity to overhaul their data protection framework and to see how to simplify it in order to make it possible to enhance AI-driven technologies and to ease eventually burden on the economy, on business. And whilst they want to continue to adhere to the recently achieved adequacy decision, they're still trying to achieve that. And I think if we can use this as a learning situation, maybe there is something that even the European Union can then take from this to see whether there is ease, in particular for smaller and medium-sized enterprises.
Well, you both touched the point of AI, and I want to stay at that point for a second. Some people say that GDPR is too prescriptive and too deeply regulating into processes, and others say it's too wide, it's too open. It doesn't mention new technologies like AI or the blockchain, because it wants to stay open to new technologies and neutral and kind of future-proof. Now we have the AI Act as an upcoming regulation on AI. And I think, Cecilia, you said that's a kind of data protection regulation as well, the AI Act or the new regulation on AI. Would it be a better way in your eyes to regulate AI within the GDPR, within an amendment or alteration, or do you like those regulations to be separated?
Cecilia, I can jump in, but if it's okay.
Go. I will go next. No problem.
Yeah.
Very strong views on this particular issue, because I really, when you look at of course, one of the legal bases is data protection also in the AI Act. It's specifically there for biometric identification. That's why that article was added to as a legal basis. Now, what the aim of the AI Act is either product safety and health issues or fundamental rights in a more broader term, but not necessarily data protection. So when you look at the high-risk scenarios under Annex 3, largely they seem to try to protect, even so it's not really specifically spelled out, issues such as non-discrimination and biases that could have an impact on specific situations. And I think there's a couple of interesting novelties in the AI Act that I think GDPR could learn from, but I don't think it can necessarily replace. The first thing is the balance between values, I think, within the framework can be better achieved. It's not as dogmatic. It gives more, and it seems to also have a structure where you can actually learn. So it's more an evolving process already, because you can amend, for example, the high-risk scenarios. There are, of course, commonalities, or on the other hand, you could learn something from the GDPR, because the GDPR focuses the responsibilities according to what each actor can control. So it's a more modular controllability. You have the controllers, and the controllers, they really are responsible for the intent of the use of the data, and the processor that has more the technical infrastructure. And in the AI Act, unfortunately, there is an error, or there's a sort of a system error in it, as the provider bears all the risk, even so some of which he cannot control. They lie clearly with the user, or we would prefer calling them the deployer. So each of the regulations can actually learn from each other in very critical cases.
Cecilia, your point before I want to ask Axel something.
When I was mentioning that the AI was a kind of data protection regulation, is not that I think that is a GDPR for AI, but that definitely we cannot be thinking of regulating AI and forgetting that GDPR exists. So this is something that needs to be taken into account. So when the AI proposal is thinking of high risk, this is a notion of the risk-based approach that exists in the GDPR. If we are having already organizations that have been investing in having a GDPR data protection impact assessment for something that is considered high risk, we need to take into account this in order not to oblige organizations to do two processes that are not talking to each other, or as the case may be, they cannot benefit from the assessment that is made. So either GDPR assessment should be made broader in order to assess the risk that we apparently would like to assess. But the thing that at least we need to take into account that this exists right now, and maybe we would like to change. But what I was talking is that we have elements that exist in GDPR that cannot be forgotten, as if the AI goes in its own way without thinking that this exists. And the same happens with respect to the unfairness principle and the non-discrimination. This is something that needs to be taken into account with respect to the legal basis that you need to be able to use in order to be able to ensure that there is no bias, because sensitive personal data is probably part of the equation of the processing that needs to be addressed in order that this could be a reality. When we think about the transparency elements that we have in the proposal, there is also transparency. So everybody complains, right, that the terms and conditions are long, that the privacy policies are even longer, that nobody reads it. So if we think about all the layers that each of the regulation is put in with respect to transparency, we are forgetting that the users are actually the beneficiaries in principle of this information in order to take better decisions. And I think we are flooded, all of us, with a lot of information that is compulsory because different laws are not talking to each other with respect to the user, that is the ultimate beneficiary, and the organizations that needs to address law number 1 and law number 2 and law number 3, and then the terms and conditions have 20 pages.
Well, when we look at Brussels, and the data economy, of course, always looks at Brussels, because the lawmaking machine seems to be running at 8,000 rounds per minute by now, producing the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Service Act, the Digital Data Governance Act, the Data Act, or some kind of Data Act is before the gates, and then there's the AI Act. But all of those drafts say they won't touch the GDPR in any way. So, Axel, Voss, what chance of alterations at the GDPR all those acts are looking at do you expect? And last year, the Commission carried out an evaluation report, but it seems that nothing follows to that report because the report said it's too early to assess the whole GDPR implications, and perhaps we need more evaluation reports. What's your view on that?
So I would say we need to be more flexible also in our mind setting. So the Commission, of course, is probably not interested in changing the GDPR right now, but we are dwarfing ourselves in a way because we know already what is right and what is wrong and how can we be better and so on, and not touching these and not trying to be better than what we have in place already is probably not something what we should intend to. So, and I see also the duty of a politician is to, if you get aware of a problem, you should kill it in a way that you are coming forward with a different perspective. But this is not happening here right now. We know already the shortcomings, but nobody seems to be willing in changing the GDPR. And this wouldn't mean that you have to change everything or to open up everything. No, it can be done differently. So at first, we can say, oh, let's think about how we apply to 1 or 2 points in a same way. So full harmonization, and not that we have even also already in Germany different interpretations of how to approach the GDPR in some points. Then, and then of course, coming to the European level, it might also differ once again. And then we might have also these a situation where you would like to clarify in the text. And this is something where you can very specific open up a legislation process and saying, oh, just I pick now an article. So just Article 25, paragraph 3 should be done in such a, or should be corrected in such and such a way. And this is not happening, and this wouldn't harm anybody. So not the user and not the individual and so on. And this would be kind of a very good way forward. And so if we are coming to AI, for instance, I'm asking sometimes myself, if we are not changing the GDPR, are we legally speaking already prepared for AI? And that's why I'm thinking sometimes we should be more open. Openness also and the changing of mindsets as a legislator now, you need also to be flexible because of this rapid changing environment in digital issues. So that's why I would say we should be more open. It can't be done in a very smooth way where nobody has to have the fear that we are now changing everything. It's just very specific problem looking to one of these problems we also what also occur already. So that's why I think it can be done in a way, and but there is probably no will really. There's also kind of being data protection fatigue in a way, and because this is kind of a very complex situation, the GDPR, and that's why I think we should be a little bit more open and thinking more in the dimension, because data are now a kind of a trade good. This is prosperity, this is wealth, and this is competition, and so on. And if we are just singling this out as a kind of a fundamental right protection, then probably we never will win the race in digital issues. So that's why I think we need to balance these better. But you have had also another question on the on a different subject, when I recall this correctly.
I come back on this later because I also lost it in mind. But I wanted to ask to the thing you mentioned, because you know the committee, you know the plenary, you know all these actors in Brussels, and some people say they are just still exhausted from the 4-year process of trying to adopt GDPR. Are they not willing to open up the basket, this heavy chest of discussions then we will have again there? Or is it perhaps the other elephant in the living room of the data economy, the e-privacy regulation? We also, what do we have to expect on the where's the time horizon?
This is remembering your other question. So, of course, at first I would say it would be better to have the e-privacy regulation integrated in the GDPR. Not the AI as what was mentioned before, but e-privacy would be better to have one good piece of legislative work where you have everything together. But so now, as you mentioned, we are opening up some spaces regarding Data Act, regarding the Digital Data Governance Act, etc., and Digital Market Act, and so on. So on DSA and DMA, so Digital Services Act and Digital Market Act, there is probably not really a need in changing the GDPR in a way. On Digital Governance Act, Data Governance Act, sorry, there now we are starting to create a new legislative tool that we are coming to a situation where we have access to data and where we can use data. This is what already the GDPR should also enable, but we are not doing this, and therefore we are looking now for different ways. And of course, what probably the Data Act only has in mind is then only machine data, and it might happen. And this is something where we might be proud of in Europe right now. But if I'm looking now to the Chinese industry, they are producing and have probably a lot more machine data than we are. And also we have to be careful not losing again the whole race. That's why we need more, in a rapid way, also access to data, not only because of AI, but also because of AI. So AI is the next strategic, relevant step in the development. And if we are not also on the top of this situation, then we might losing again ground, and this is what shouldn't happen. So that's why I'm desperately looking for possibilities and getting better access to data, better possibilities to analysis, and so on.
I would like to ask the industry side of the panel again, if there are certain points you can highlight in the GDPR that could or even should be amended or modified in your view to foster your branch, the digital economy. Are there those certain points to be named? Perhaps Cornelia, if you start.
One that I have clearly in mind, and that is now also addressed through different tools, as Axel was just explaining, is of course health data, where GDPR has a derogation allowing different rules in different countries, and we have seen that this is handled in different countries very differently. For some in the Nordics have allowed more use of secondary use of health data for research than this is possible in others. And within the European health data space, the Commission has started to look at this and is trying to address secondary use of health data. And of course, given the pandemic, worldwide pandemic, I think there has been no better example of how necessary and how useful and socially beneficial the secondary use of health data can be for solving these critical issues such as COVID. So that is certainly something that hopefully will be addressed and should be addressed. There, I leave it to Cecilia to mention another example.
So Cecilia, what's number one on your wish list?
I would not necessarily think of the wish list per Facebook, but thinking of elements that I have been dealing with in my whole career in data protection. And one of them was a report that was commissioned by the European Parliament regarding blockchain. And the three elements that were mentioned there, they were not mentioning that the GDPR needs to be changed, but at least the interpretation that has been traditionally been provided by certain DPAs or the Article 29 at that time was actually even worse than the GDPR letter. And this is something that I think we should be taking into account. But they were focusing on three topics. One was the joint controllership. That seems now to be invoked, that in doubt on when do you think that is too complex, just in case everyone is the joint controllers, which is something that goes against common sense. And in the blockchain situation, of course, to have each node being a data controller, not being able actually to control everything on the processing, this is actually nonsense. The second element was the purpose limitation, not because it needs to disappear, but it needs probably to be thought in a less narrow manner. And this is something that I have encountered also in the research community. I have been working very much in this sector before joining Facebook. And, you know, one of the things that I always remember that someone was telling me, you know, you are the patient of tomorrow. And this is so true. Now that I am healthy, maybe I'm not thinking that my data will be useful for anything, but when I am ill, I am definitely ready that my data are used for anything, because I'm desperate in the good and bad sense of the thing, in order that things are actually improving my quality of life or my life period. So that this element of being able to share data and focusing more on the safeguards rather than on the over-reliance on consent or putting the burden on consent of people, I think that we need to rethink a bit. And this is not because the GDPR doesn't have other legal grounds, but the way in which this has been enforced, has been made under construction, it seems that consent is the only thing that is really bulletproof. And this, I think, we are not going, I think, in the right direction on this. But it is true that there has not been a lot of work on the safeguards. So we need to think about how to address this. The third point that was in this report was anonymization. And I think that this is very interesting, because sometimes in certain proposals of the Commission is like the GDPR has its own field, and this is for the non-personal data. When the problem is, what is non-personal data? Because the construction of personal data has been so wide that I don't know what is not personal data anymore, or what is the security for organizations, for the public sector, to think that this is anonymous. And why we have these concerns? Because it seems that when it is anonymous, you do whatever you want. And when it is anonymous, you can not do anything. So this cannot work this way, because personal data has a value in themselves for the society and for individuals at the end of the day. So we cannot be in this kind of world in which only when I narrow everything and nothing can be done, then I have a good protection. I think we can have a good protection when there is a balance of the interest that we have at stake, in which we have other fundamental rights and freedoms that are extremely important, and data protection is one of them. So don't get me wrong, but this cannot define everything as if I don't care about personal data. Yes, I do care, and a lot, but this does not mean that she should rule everything.
Yes, of course, there's much of insecurity about when data is sufficiently anonymized and when not, and guidelines are missing. Also in Germany, the Federal Data Protection Commissioner only said that is data processing when you anonymize, and when you anonymize, it's the same as when you delete data. But about the real procedures of anonymization, we still miss guidelines. Axel, is there perhaps the chance to have such guidelines in technical view be included in the Data Governance Act? Because the Data Governance Act also touches issues like data altruism, data spreading, data sharing, and also this, when you don't want to touch the GDPR and its content, it has to be clearly anonymized data. So perhaps can we wait for definitions, some guidelines with that act?
So guidelines might help, but will probably not be the solution. So if I'm looking to the Data Governance Act, so of course there should be a kind of motivation in using more data regarding administrative data and also health data. And also here we are coming into a situation, but then we are trying to integrate also the so-called, I think in the English expression, trustees. So that you have someone in place who has your personal data, who is anonymizing these, and then you can use the anonymized data. And this might be a way forward to get privacy and using of personal data also in a good balance. But it has to be done in a way, and we have to come forward. And but guidelines here also might help. But again, it won't be the solution for everything. We need a kind of a clear legislative process also for this question, to use health data in a proper way. And of course, if you find out that the pill you are taking for some specific disease is not the best one, then you have to re-identify, and therefore a third person might be a good answer to this.
So we are approaching the end of the panel, and perhaps all of you could name the year when the GDPR will be modified. Axel, what do you expect? Just a number. It stays a secret if you mute it. we don't hear. Yeah, no.
So the political will is not there for modifying the GDPR right now. I'm still working on it, but I'm not sure if I will be successful.
Okay, we will keep an eye on you in Brussels. Cornelia, what do you expect?
Well, I will. I mean, given that Axel is in the European Parliament, I will say it's not in this legislative period for sure. And so before I will widely guess what's happening in the next legislative period, I'd say in the meantime, I think there will be technologies that are evolving, such as privacy preserving machine learning, that will help us out to do AI in a privacy friendly way.
Okay, Cecilia, what do you expect?
I do not have a date, surprisingly, but I would hope actually that since maybe the GDPR is not going to be immediately modified, that at least the construction that we have is a forward-thinking construction, because this is the best that we can have when the law cannot be changed, that at least the way in which we try to adapt it to the realities that we have, and to be courageous as well, and not to think that because you are flexible, it doesn't mean that you do not protect. You can protect being flexible, but this requires more thinking than just to prohibit. So I would expect that the construction will be forward thinking, and that we will get inspired by the UK process, that they are also, by the way, reviewing the code of anonymization in addition to the UK GDPR reform.
Okay, protection and flexibility, that sounds like a good combination. And now we reached really the end of the panel, and I would like to thank Cecilia Alvarez, Cornelia Kutterer and Axel Voss.